The 50,000 subscriber merch hoodies are available now through the link in the description. The Gyrfalcon's Hauberk is the newest entry to the Hunter Exotic Armor roster, arriving with Season 18 of Destiny 2, and quite frankly, it can do some borderline game-breaking stuff that I am going to show you in this video. And when I say game-breaking, I'm talking about stuff like one-phasing Oryx with no Well of Radiance and no Ward of Dawn. At first glance, this exotic armor piece paired with the Void subclass looks incredibly powerful on paper by granting a 35% damage buff to yourself and overshields to your fellow teammates. But in practice, is it good enough to dethrone the reigning king in Omnioculus? Well, yes and no. Today we are going to take a look at everything the Gyrfalcon's Hauberk does, including the damage buff stacking capabilities, ally shield values, and a hidden feature of the exotic that isn't shown in the perk description. After that, we are going to see what all this buff stacks and does not stack with, and see what the maximum possible damage buff is. Spoiler alert, it's way higher than 35%. We are then going to look at where the Gyrfalcon's Hauberk is best utilized, and how, specifically, you can make the most out of its effects. And finally, we will dive into that previous question: is this thing better than the Omnioculus? While I can tell you right now this exotic is well worth your time and attention, a definitive answer to its duel with the Omnioculus is going to require us to look at a few things in this video first. Let's start with how to even get the damn thing. Most know that the only way to obtain brand new exotic armor pieces is by completing Legend and Master difficulty daily lost sectors. Luckily for you, I actually have a channel in my Discord server titled Daily Lost Sectors that will not only tell you the lost sector for that daily reset in conjunction with the exotic armor piece it is rewarding, but also all of the champions, shields, and burns associated with that lost sector. You can join this Discord server to easily get on-demand access to all of this information right now by using the link in the description below. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel while you're down there to stay up to date on all of my educational and informative Destiny content like this video right here. Now that that's covered, let's get into the numbers and secret features of this exotic. Starting with the damage perk, the Gyrfalcon's Hauberk grants you a 35% weapon damage buff for 5 seconds after exiting invisibility. This is any type of invisibility as well, such as the Smoke Bomb, Shadow Dive, Vanishing Step, Echo of Obscurity, and even invisibility effects received from ally abilities. The Gyrfalcon's damage buff does not stack with weapon damage effects from Well of Radiance. It also does not stack with damage boosts from the Radiant buff granted from ally solar subclass abilities, or the damage boost from the High Energy Fire mod while charged with light. But what it does stack with is the Font of Might mod, which increases any elemental damage matching that of your subclass by 25% for 10 seconds when picking up an elemental well that also matches your subclass energy type. And there is actually also a way to get the buff for up to 30 seconds instead of 10 seconds, which I will show you later in the video. These two buffs together make for a grand total of a 68.75% damage buff, which if we round up is, well, let's just say it's nice. It's well worth noting, however, that it is not possible to refresh the buff while it is already active, so make sure it is expired before exiting invisibility for a fresh 5 seconds. As for the secondary component of this exotic, when using a finisher on an enemy combatant while invisible, all nearby allies will receive a reserve shield, activatable on their next class ability cast. This shield will absorb approximately 50 damage in total once activated. Now that's all the Gyrfalcon's Hauberk does according to its description, but looks can be deceiving. Gyrfalcon's actually has a hidden piece of utility where, in addition to granting nearby allies reserve shields on invisible finishers, all enemies in the vicinity of the finished target will become volatile as well. Now, knowing everything that it does is important, but none of it matters if you don't know the best ways to put it to use, and calling this exotic's use cases complicated is an understatement. It has some playstyles and ability patterns that are downright horrible, but also has some that are unrivaled in their power. Let's start with the bad. The Gyrfalcon's Hauberk's overshielding and volatile finisher utilities are borderline useless, to be completely honest. Let's be practical practical here. The amount of times that a target is already finishable while you are invisible, with other allies in range to provide a shield to, and other enemies to inflict with volatile, are few and far between. And even if you decided to dedicate an entire build to this, with volatile round fragments and stylish executioner to make you invisible when killing volatile enemies to continue the chain, it's trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. The reality of Destiny 2 is that, with the exception of contest and master mode content, enemies are made of paper mache, and a 50-point overshield and a regularly available 35% damage buff against rank and file targets is simply not necessary. And in contest and master activities where it would be necessary, you aren't getting finishers frequently enough to keep your buff and debuff loops active due to the tankiness of the enemies. But it's not all doom and gloom, because the damage buff component of this exotic is unparalleled in its boss DPS capabilities, and it's the sole reason that you need to add this exotic to your arsenal right now. The Gyrfalcon's Hauberk is what I like to call a hot swap exotic. A hot swap exotic is one that provides a very specific function at a very specific time, and as a result does not need to be equipped at all times. Whenever the specific situation arises, the exotic can simply be quickly put on, used to execute its purpose, and then swapped back to a better neutral game exotic armor piece immediately after. A perfect example of a hot swap exotic is the Celestial Nighthawk. This exotic significantly buffs Golden Gun damage, however it's incredibly unnecessary to keep it on for the entirety of a raid encounter. This exotic is only providing a benefit during the boss DPS phase of a raid encounter when you are actually using your Golden Gun, and as such, it makes more sense to simply hot swap the Celestial Nighthawk on when entering a DPS phase and swapping back to a stronger neutral game exotic like the 6th Coyote when returning to the mechanics and intermission phases of the fight. The Gyrfalcon's Hauberk has the same philosophy, being an absolute powerhouse for raid boss DPS phases, but paling in comparison to something like the Omnioculus during the more ad-clearing, mechanical, and survival-focused aspects of encounters. As such, similar to the Celestial Nighthawk and 6th Coyote, you'll want to use the Omnioculus preceding the DPS phase of a fight, and hot swap to the Gyrfalcon's Hauberk as you enter the DPS phase, to make the most out of your exotic arsenal at all stages of the fight. But how exactly do you make the most out of your Gyrfalcon's damage buff? Because it's not nearly as simple as spamming your invisibility cooldowns whenever your damage buff expires, and with some experience and the help of some teammates, you can do some borderline game-breaking stuff. The first two use cases are when you are not coordinating with your team in any capacity, and they are both quite simple. In a situation where you have no enemies nearby, you will want to execute your dodge, followed by 5 seconds of buffed damage. Immediately after your buff expires, you'll want to execute your smoke, again followed by 5 seconds of buffed damage. Assuming you are running 100 mobility with the utility kickstart mod, your dodge will be returning in 16 seconds after its initial use, granting you another invisibility cooldown with your dodge shortly after your second instance of your damage buff. But what if you have enemies near you? Well, it's the same combo, but starting with your smoke instead of your dodge. Your smoke will grant you your first 5 seconds of buffed damage, followed by your dodge once it expires, which will not only grant another 5 seconds of buffed damage, but also refund your smoke charge, assuming you are utilizing Gambler's Dodge. From there, it's simply shoot, smoke, shoot, and dodge, and that will cover the entirety of the DPS phase and 99% of Destiny encounters. But what about that Font of Might buff from scavenging Void Elemental Wells to get up to that 68.75% damage buff? Well, you have 3 solid ways to create Void Elemental Wells either leading up to or during a DPS phase. The first is with Reaping Wellmaker, which generates a Void Elemental Well on your next weapon final blow after activating your class ability. The next is Elemental Ordnance, which will generate an Elemental Well matching your subclass type on grenade final blows. The final method is Melee Wellmaker, which will generate an Elemental Well matching your subclass type on powered melee final blows. In addition to one or all of those mods, you can also utilize either Seeking Wells or Bountiful Wells. Seeking Wells is best in a situation where you don't want to worry about finding the wells to scavenge during a DPS phase, having them travel to you on creation. Bountiful Wells are more appropriate in a situation where you might have an easier time locating the wells in a DPS DPS phase, as it creates a duplicate well for every elemental well you create. Since the Font of Might buff lasts for 10 seconds, and elemental wells live on the ground for 20 seconds, you can easily get 20 seconds of the Font of Might damage buff for every elemental well generation instance when using bountiful wells. But that is just the solo methodology. What happens if you have teammates that are also on board with your plan? Well, here comes the crazy part. In a world where you have multiple hunters that all want in on this strategy, you can have one hunter on Omnioculus and all other hunters on Gyrfalcon's Hauberk. The sole responsibility of the Omnioculus hunter is to make sure the entirety of the team is made invisible every 5 seconds, and since they are using Omnioculus, they will get their entire smoke bomb back every time they make at least 2 ally guardians invisible, allowing this to be executed infinitely. This allows the Gyrfalcon's hunters to focus exclusively on DPS, removing the one downside of this exotic of having to stop your DPS to reapply your damage buff with invisibility cooldowns. And for every hunter you have running Gyrfalcons, the stronger this becomes, because whether you have 2 hunters or 5 hunters running it, you still only need one Omnioculus hunter to maintain that infinite 35% damage buff for everyone. In situations like these, if you had a divinity on the squad, you would want the Omnioculus hunter to shoot that as well in between their smoke bomb throws. And I want to emphasize smoke bomb throws there as well, because the Omnioculus hunter can run melee Wellmaker as well in encounters where enemies run to you in the DPS phase, like Golgoroth and Oryx, to generate Void Elemental Wells to grant the Gyrfalcon's hunters their Font of Might damage buffs on top of their invisibility damage buffs. And remember how I said you could get that Font of Might damage buff for up to 30 seconds? The Omnioculus hunter is the key to that, because if they are the one focused on creating elemental wells for all of the Gyrfalcon's hunters with melee Wellmaker from their smoke bombs, then the Gyrfalcon's hunters don't need to run any elemental well generation mods. Instead, they can opt for Elemental Time Dilation, which provides increased duration from Elemental Well effects for each copy of the Elemental Well mod you have equipped. With Elemental Time Dilation and 1 copy of Font of Might, your base timer of 10 seconds jumps to 13 seconds. And if you tack a copy of Font of Might onto all of your armor pieces, for a total of 4, picking up 1 Elemental Well will grant you the Font of Might damage buff for 30 seconds. In addition to your already permanent 35% Gyrfalcon's damage buff, you have a 68.75% damage buff for the entirety of any DPS phase in the entire game. So, is the Gyrfalcon's Hauberk better than the Omnioculus? Like I said in the beginning, yes and no. And after everything we have talked about, I'm sure you can see why. They both shine in their own right, but they shine best together. The Gyrfalcon's Hauberk and the Omnioculus were practically made for each other, like peanut butter and jelly, SpongeBob and Patrick, and you and the subscribe button. That's the smoothest way I know how to ask you to subscribe. If that fails, then I give up. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a great day. Hey, I just wanted to take a brief opportunity to thank you all so much for 50,000 subscribers. It's an absolute dream come true. And if you haven't subscribed already and you watch the videos a lot, you don't have to subscribe yet, but if you keep watching them and you like them, I definitely hope that you decide to join us at some point on the road to 100,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for always watching. I love you all. As always, please have a great day.